dear beautiful people, the next two uploads are two recordings from podcasts I did in cooperation with Hot Topics Live. Two wonderful friends of mine are the hosts of this show, and their show is usually about healing depression and traumatic experiences, but also they invite a lot of interesting people with spiritual experiences or individual life stories to share, to inspire many people. I would like to introduce you to their podcast because they have given me the permission also to share the two episodes that we had on my YouTube channel, which is very kind of them to do. So if you're interested in maybe being introduced to an interesting podcast series, then please do both of them a favor and click the link in the description that leads to their podcast on Facebook. So if you're interested in that, you're supporting me, but you're also supporting them. Thank you very much.
Hello everybody, welcome to Hot Topics, the show. My name is Gloria Goldberg, the founder of the podcast Unbreakable Life with Glory, where I talk about depression, anxiety, and PTSD in a holistic way, a natural way, and making you to understand that these emotions are natural for you to feel better. And today, next to me, like always, I have my beautiful co-host.
I'm Kia Baker, and I am the creator and founder of the Female Veterans Podcast and Women Warrior Stories for the Veterans Channel, a new network. And I am also a success coach at London Real Academy, which I love probably as much as all of it. Like, I just love it all. So, but you know me, and I'm happy to be here. How are you? How are you, sweetie?
I'm great. I'm great. It's just today is like it's weird today, but it's beautiful at the same time.
Yeah, I have been having a few weird days, to say the least, but I'm okay. I think I'm halfway through it, and I'm moving in the right direction. So,
But they
that's
said
good.
there is like a shift right now in the planet with Mercury, if I'm not mistaken.
Mercury growing in retrograde, Venus in retrograde, all these
So
retrogrades.
they said that every move that you make, you have to be careful and read the small letters. So
hmm
means that you have to be careful any kind of move or any kind of changes that you're gonna do this time
hmm
until
And
July 12th.
communication can get scrambled up. So you
Yeah.
have to be careful with communications. And then I just did it, and stuttering over your words and like not getting them out clearly can be attributed to Mercury in retrograde, so they say.
Yeah. So before we start, also to bring our guest, because we have a very cool guest today, we need to
Mhm.
give our policies, our
Our disclaimers.
disclaimer.
Yeah.
So the first disclaimer is if you are under 18, you cannot be here, you cannot see the show. And also the opinions of our guest and the opinions of each one is individual. Sometimes we agree or disagree with them. Doesn't mean that we agree with everything they said.
That's right. That is absolutely right. A lot of times we do, but hey, sometimes we believe in freedom of speech. So people are going to say things, and we're not always going to vibe with that, but we definitely believe in the right to say it, especially me as a veteran. So,
Yeah, so Kia, I want to bring the guest today a little bit more earlier because he have a lot of things to teach us and I can wait to listen to him. He's a healer and also he's a psychotherapist, he's a writer, and he talked about a lot about the energies, about chakras, about a lot about the five sense, about the quantum fields, about energy. So I just want to know everything about what he knows about it.
so excited. Okay, let's bring him out.
So I'm gonna bring right now. His name is Julian Polzin, and let's welcome him in.
Mercury.
Mercury.
I'm going to blame everything on that.
Hey, Julian.
Hello together. Thank you for having me, Gloria and Kia. I'm very happy to share knowledge with people in hope that it may serve them on whatever the journey they are currently on.
So Julian, can you tell our audience where's your location and what time is it?
Well, I'm living in Bonn. This is the old capital of Germany. Yeah, and we have around 9 p.m. right now here.
Wow, very
Right.
cool.
And
So
how-
I have a
Yeah, go ahead.
psychotherapy office here, and I've opened a Zen school where I teach Zen Buddhist methods. Yeah, and I combine psychotherapy with, let's say, mystical practices.
So what is the difference between psychotherapy with physiotherapy? I have a confusion there with the two words.
You mean between psychotherapy and like physiotherapy?
Right.
Right. Well, if you think about the terminology, psyche originally was the Greek word for soul, and therapist was the word for guide. So when you understand it, actually, a psychotherapist in that sense is a soul guide, right? So, but it's not physical, but is working on the mental realm. So in that sense, the physiotherapist works physically, the psychotherapist works mentally.
And I ask you this question because a lot of people get confused. So for people that don't know, so they can see the difference of those two words.
Well, yes, and of course there are many different schools of psychotherapy. So many have an idea of what it would be like to go to a psychotherapist and receive some sort of counseling, but it's a very varied field. And nowadays, of course, with more and more people awakening spiritually, it's a field where the modern psychotherapist is often also one who is spiritually inclined. I know very few modern psychotherapists who have not had experiences, for example, with psychedelics or practice mindfulness or have some sort of yoga or meditation regimen. So we see a fusion now of Eastern and Western knowledge into what you could call a new science. We are at the dawn of this experience.
So what exactly do you do? You said that what do you help people to achieve?
Well, for you, it was very important to understand trauma. And trauma has a bad reputation. We often think about trauma as something that we want to avoid. Now, it's perfectly natural in nature when you think about any living being that it tries to avoid pain and seek out pleasure. But human experience is much more complex than that. And trauma is often an invitation for us to enter higher realms of consciousness. That means to transform our limited sense of self, to expand, to broaden our understanding. And if you think about it, many beings who have inspired humans over the last few centuries were beings who often had a tough time. So they needed to find creative answers to a situation where we couldn't do it from the limited self-understanding that we had. So what I see usually with people, how trauma builds up, it's a little bit like this. When you look at an animal, for example, a cat or a dog, or you look at a young child, they will express themselves authentically. They don't even know how to not be authentic. But when they get born into a collective consciousness that exists as a belief system, they enter this structure. And now their behavior is being filtered through the belief of the collective. And the collective says, well, certain behaviors of you we accept and certain behaviors of you we reject. And then you have a split in the psyche. So the child will begin to suppress authentic parts of itself in order to fit in. And this is the birth of what spiritual teachers often call the ego. The ego is a fake self that we create in order to survive. While children might choose this consciously, I give you an example. If a child is very sensitive and experiences dysfunctional behavior in their parents and is pointing it out, but the parents at the time cannot accept it, then they will punish the child for expressing it. Now the child starts limiting its own energy by suppressing its ability to be sensitive, for example. And this is just a form of intelligence, of being able to notice things. Instead, there's now a fake self created that is not sensitive, that pretends to be not emotional about it. And in that moment, we start suppressing soul energy. Because the moment you cease to be authentic, you have created an energy inhibition. Basically an energy blocker. And most people have this energy blocker and it manifests as a self-concept. an idea of who you think you are, but this is completely conditioned by society. And we indoctrinate children into a belief system, not reflecting on if it serves them or not, if it blocks their abilities or not. Now, many later in life, when their nervous system is developed enough, will begin to reflect on it. And then they seek a way of undoing the ego, basically letting go of the energy blockage that they have put in place as a form of self-protection. It's a type of, let's say, archaeology of mind, where you try to reverse engineer what you lost to begin with. Right?
Wow.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me, actually. I feel like I've done that for sure. But I do have a question about this. So do you think that we can do this many times in our lives? For example, you're talking about a child. So with myself, for example, there were certain things that I was conditioned and behaviors I was conditioned to have being raised growing up in my household. And then I left there and went to private school, and that changed. Different ones came into play. So then that added another layer. And then I had to restructure who I was there and that collective. And then again in the military, do you think that this is an accurate thought process, like to say that we have to do this, or we can have to do this many times in our lives?
Well, it happens many times in life. It's just the question, is it a conscious or is it an unconscious process? Yeah, are you being fed a programming that you then act out unconsciously, or is the programming that you create your own conscious choice to have that programming? So when you learn any skill, for example, in the military, if you think about it, they break down your old identity to recreate a new identity that is suitable for the job, right?
Exactly.
Many athletes know this. If you speak about, for example, combat sports athletes, like mixed martial artists, for example, they're drilling certain combinations over and over. So they're reshaping their nervous system to have a certain response to a particular situation. But here's the thing. All of that is on a deeper level of existence limitation. Because if you think about your neurological makeup, let's say this is the hardware and you put software in it. It means you create programs for certain type of behaviors. Acting from a program is always a limitation. Mm-hmm. To access true creativity, I need to go beyond all programs. And this is what I actually do through my Zen and meditation practice, what I try to teach people. Because usually what would a behavioral therapist do, a cognitive behavioral therapist? He would see which programming are blocking a being in progressing in life towards where they want to be, and they would replace it with a more adept program. But we are replacing one limitation with a little bit, let's say, a more suitable limitation, but it's still a limitation. Mm-hmm. I want you all to have access, basically to have the admin password. Yeah, I want beings to be able to understand that anything that you can create and uncreate is not you. You see, when you can change the structure of the nervous system, and many yogis now know this, when you speak to yogis and Buddhist monks who have practiced for a very long time, they have completely reshaped what you would perceive as their personality. And they do this so the personality and the nervous system and the energy system becomes an expression of soul consciousness. This is an intelligence that goes far beyond all types of programming. So when a Buddhist master would speak to you about karma, what he actually means is memory, because you have many layers of memory. You have cell memory, you have DNA, which is a memory data bank. You have collective memory, for example, history. You have memory in the nervous system. You have traumatic memory. But all those memories create conditions, and conditions are definitions. That means any definition is automatically a limitation. Now, do I want to be a limited being, or do I want to be a being that channels its highest aspect intelligently, that is beyond all programs? So I need to understand if I want to be truly conscious in the present moment, which is eternity. That is the key. Right now is eternity. You see, when you think about the past, it's nothing but memory. When you think about the future, it's fantasy. But when do you think about the past or the future? You do it right now. So you never have any other experience than right now. So if you are right now, you are forever. That's something most people don't get that. Everything that changes, that comes and goes, is an illusion. So then if my personality can come and go, then it is a dream. If my memories can come and go, it is a dream. This body changes, it experiences time. But I am watching while it changes. The one who's watching cannot change, because otherwise he would be unconscious of the fact that change happens. So we have this part in us that does not change, but witnesses the change. And the illusion that we have, let's say the ego illusion, is once we start identifying with any particular memory or phenomenon. So most of us, when we enter the body at birth, we have complete amnesia of who we are. And suddenly we have blinders on. And we try to restore ourselves to our original intelligence in this process. So once I have a body and I get a name and I get a religion and maybe a political ideology or whatever, I'm full with programs, but they are not me because they're changeable. Everything that is changeable is not who I am. Does that make sense?
So people should, when they have kids, they should not put anything. They should not program the kids. So that will be, we will be more pure human being.
But
right?
But they learn from what we are doing as much as what we tell them, right? So they're being programmed virtually by watching us. So how difficult is that? That's what I'd like to add on to that question.
Well, that's challenging because, of course, what you're speaking about right now is like, how do we act from wisdom? You see, often when we act from love, but love is not balanced by wisdom, then we get confused about our actions. Of course, the child will process all input it ever gets. And all that input it gets becomes its thought matrix. So when people speak about a matrix is a collection of belief that you filter reality through. So any child will develop certain beliefs because, of course, of the behavior of the parents, of the behavior of other children in school, because of the behavior of teachers and the media it consumes. Now, beliefs create emotions. If I have no beliefs that don't create emotion, then there is no suffering. This is, let's say, a wisdom that the masters have, that they can be thoughtless, so therefore emotionless, so therefore do not experience suffering. Now, bringing up a child, what we often try to do, we try to avoid something. So maybe we have a trauma in the past, where our parents, where we feel they didn't treat us with compassion, they didn't treat us with empathy. Now we have a fear of repeating that, but now we are focusing on fear. And this is, let's say, the thing that is the most dysfunctional is to try to avoid something. Now my vibration is one of fear. So when you speak about energy, you focus on avoidance, you create what you're trying to avoid. I'll give you an example. If I have a young mother in therapy and she's asking for counseling because she doesn't want to give the trauma her mother gave her to her daughter, right? She wants to, in that sense, end the wheel of karma. She does not want to basically transfer that energy that might be hundreds of years old, by the way. That's why it's never personal. You see, it's never personal. This can be from your great-great-grandfather and from his great-great-grandfather and so on. So the energy that arrives in your life when you get born might be thousands of years old. People don't get that. So it's never personal. It is collective. It is being handed down. And what we try is to break the pattern, to stop transferring karma from one generation to the next. And this means we need to pay great attention. But if I focus on avoiding, this is exactly what I create. So many mothers who focus on being, let's say, avoiding being a bad mother, who have this, let's say, ideology, I gotta be a good mother. I have to be a good mother. Every time you have thoughts like I have to, I must, I should, this is ego, this is programming. Because it's like someone is dictating that. It's a dictatorship. Okay? So when you realize there's a thought, I have to, I must, I should, these are not your own genuine thoughts. This is the matrix you have been receiving. And maybe your mother tried to avoid being a bad mother. So if I try to be a good mother and it's very compulsive, I'm terrified of being a bad mother, now my child might express something and I ignore what my child is feeling. Because otherwise my idea of good mother is threatened. So every time you have a self-concept, you're not paying attention. When you have a self-concept, this forms your identity. Even though identity is an illusion, we extend our survival instinct to our self-concept. And now we defend it to the death. You see this in when people talk about left against right, men against women, right? White against black, all identity. All of that is completely interchangeable and arbitrary. People don't want to hear that because they have invested so much emotional charge into an idea of themselves. They're addicted to it. So when we see a child, we need to, let's say, see the child with a complete beginner's mind, with an emptiness of not trying to avoid something, but also not trying to approach a certain thing. Study the child by watching it without any bias, without any preconception. And then intuition arises, which is a much higher intelligence than any conditioned intelligence ever.
So what you're saying is when a young mother or whatever mother's gonna have their kid, instead of thinking what kind of mother she wanna be, just let it be to see what the kid is gonna show her, so she can understand more the kid.
Yes. Okay. It's very important to be open to the experience. Because any type of conditioning, any type of memory that I have, that I apply as behavior, can only reproduce itself. There is no true creativity. Yeah, I made it a little bit complex, so I try to make it more simple. Let's say one of you had an aunt, and when you were a little kid, this aunt was pretty mean. Was a pretty mean old lady. Now you're somewhere in the city and there's an old lady and she's asking you for the way because she got lost. But her body language is a little bit like that aunt that you didn't like. Now you start seeing her as your aunt and you project the feelings that you had about your aunt on that old lady. And suddenly you wonder, why is this conversation so awkward? Why do we both feel so unpleasant? Because in that moment, we do not realize that we act from memory. Now, if in that moment I would have watched my breath and I would have been conscious in the body, would have stood up straight, I would have relaxed my jaw and relaxed my shoulders, I would have been incapable of having a fight or flight response. What is a fight or flight response? Well, it's very simple. Every time you have a hardening of the body, you're actually in a state of fear. So when you see people worry, they are actually in a state of fear. But they react to their own thought process, to their biases. So for example, oh, this is my aunt. My brain believes this is my aunt, even though it's not my aunt. Suddenly I have a fight or flight response. I harden myself. And the moment I harden myself, my energy frequency drops. And now I act from a limited level of consciousness, which is biological. I cannot see her other than that.
So you need to see people all the time in the same way, without judgment, like
yes.
just to see what the person is telling you, or how to real see that person, not to put any kind of boundaries on it.
Well, boundaries would be conceptual. So you already understand it. Every time you have a concept about something, you confuse the concept for reality. Right? So, for example, if I would have a stone in my hand and I would drop it to the ground, it would make a sound. That sound is reality. Your opinion about it is not. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So it is most important to be open to experience, but I can only do this if I transcend my programming. To be able to transcend my programming, I need to be aware of the present moment and not be trapped in mind. So for most clients, when they enter psychotherapy, in order to truly know themselves, they first need to step out of their mind. Yeah.
And how they do that, how we do that, like step out of the mind when we have for many years with the same concept in your mind. how you help to reprogram a person?
Well, first of all, the big breakthrough comes already when people become conscious of that there is a program running. So I give you an example. There are many, when they start practicing meditation, they go in with the bias, meditation is supposed to make me more peaceful. Well, good luck with that attitude. Well, when you start practicing meditation, what it makes you is aware, but not more peaceful. So most people, for example, are constantly on their smartphones. They're constantly on their PC. They're constantly processing input, receiving input. This creates a lot of noise. Now, this noise is a distraction. I cannot truly know myself if I'm constantly addicted to input. Now we do something utterly boring. So if you think about a Zen monk who lives in a temple, he has no smartphone, probably no internet. All day he's sitting in meditation, and there's no stimulation whatsoever. So now he can watch the mind running because he's not distracted from mind. He's watching his breath, no distraction whatsoever. And now suddenly all the anxiety, all the old energies, all the traumas, all the programs, they're surfacing. They're entering the conscious mind now because no distraction.
Right.
So this is where most people turn around and run. Because when they're looking for a spiritual teacher, they're looking for someone to make them comfortable. They're not looking for transformation. They want just their ego to be more comfortable. And what we seek is liberation from ego and not for liberation for the ego. So our limited self-concept needs to go. So in that sense, in order to transcend my programming, I first simply need to shift my awareness back into my body, because any sensation keeps me in the present moment. Now, my illusionary identity exists in ideas of time. Because when you are in your illusionary identity, what do? You think about past and future. Okay, that's the illusion of time. But time is only kept in the mind. Now, if I watch my breath, I have an anchor in this present moment because I have another sensation. I cannot be fully occupied by mind. So when you see, for example, that certain monks move very slowly, this is how they step out of the autopilot. Everything you do has a certain speed. So if you modify just one factor that breaks the pattern, you stop being an autopilot, you do things manually. Now you're suddenly aware and conscious of the present moment. So there's certain tricks. So you focus on sensations. That means you touch something, or you smell something, you listen to something, you watch your breath, or you slow down your movement. All those little tricks create what we would call mindfulness, a detached state of being. Now, from that detached state of being, you suddenly can watch the programs run. It's like as if you, let's say, have Windows running and you open the task manager. Now you see all the processes that run in the background. Mm-hmm. You weren't conscious of those processes running. But the moment you enter this present reality, just by watching your breath or focusing on sensations or slowing down, you become aware of the programs. And the moment you're aware of it, you have choice. There is no choice before you're aware of it. You just act out your trauma, for example, right? But the moment you can observe the program, in that moment you have choice. So let's say you're standing in a desert and there are train tracks, and now you see a train running through the desert. You see it from distance. But if you jump on the train, that train of thought takes over and you have no conscious choice any longer. So basically, we need to learn by watching our breath not to hop on our thoughts. So we do not judge them. Yeah, we do not approve of them or disapprove of them, because that would mean I hop on the train of thought. In that moment, the program has me. Does it make sense?
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's sort of like my goal, actually, when I meditate, and I'm not there by any stretch of the imagination, is to allow the thoughts to come through and go out, and not actually think them, if that makes sense. So when I'm in the meditative state, and this is like the hardest thing in the world for me to do. It's by no means easy, but this is what I try every single day, and I'm getting a little bit better at it. So this is my understanding of what you mean. I hope that is what you are talking about, because if not, I'm completely lost.
Well, yes. Exactly that. I remember the old wise Zen master Suzuki. He used to say the following thing. Yeah, he says, keep your front door and your back door open. Let your thoughts come and go. Just don't serve them tea. It's exactly that. Because the moment you agree or disagree with the thought, you have created identity. And then you're limited. So when you come to the following understanding, and I try to give a metaphor because metaphors are often much easier than if we speak about it in concept and theories. So one time I had a student, an older woman, and she was dying of cancer. And she wanted to know how could she go consciously into death with as least suffering as possible. And she had this moment one time that after we sat in meditation, she said, I watched myself think. Then I said, well, let's revisit that. Let's see if that is actually true. So I asked her, if right now outside, if it would be raining, would that make you the rainmaker? And then she starts laughing. Of course not. I'm not making the rain. So I'm asking her, okay, so if we look at your thoughts, why do you come to the conclusion that you are the thinker? Thinking happens to you like rain does. It has no identity. So once you understand that, you stop beating yourself up. When there is a belief that certain thoughts are allowed and certain thoughts are not allowed, in that moment, you go to war with yourself. You see, every time you have a self-concept, the self-concept is something that opposes your authentic being. Because identity always exists in conflict with something, otherwise it cannot exist. It needs some border, it needs some sort of definition. It needs to say, I am that, but I am not this. So the moment you pick certain thoughts as your identity, you go to war with other thoughts. So the mind can never calm down.
Yes.
But if I see mind, let's say what happens in mind, if I see thought as a happening, like I see rain, like I would watch rain, right? I wouldn't create emotional struggle by watching rain. Does it make sense?
Yeah. So a person that have a trauma, I'm going to give you an example myself. When I was kidnapped, the trauma that I had is always like I get triggered very easy when somebody's follow me, or when I feel like insecure, I feel anxious, and it transport me to that event. So, and I really want to rid of that. How I can do that? How I will stop that feeling, those sensations about anxiety because of that trauma?
All right. You see, that's a complex process, but let me try to break it down a little bit. So trauma is memory that is energized. So in the situation where the trauma occurred, the energy that you experienced was so overwhelming that you couldn't process the energy. So in that moment, you experience disassociation, but the energy is still in the system. Yeah, and it comes out when you have a trigger. For example, I had a friend who was a war veteran, and he was in the Balkans. This is where he was as a German soldier, where he was stationed. And when he saw fireworks, I saw him how he had the reflex of jumping into a ditch. So in that moment, the old energy takes over and we lose consciousness. Now, if I want to integrate a trauma, because integration is healing, integration can only happen through acceptance. So I need to find a way of accepting the initial experience. Now, with regards to this, we have to, let's say, I'll speak about something that's not very popular. I will speak about the difference between pity and compassion. Pity is often something that is very, very harmful. I will give you a concrete example. If I have a Zen student sitting in meditation and they're sitting upright, and now during meditation, a trauma surfaces. Now they start crying, their posture is breaking down. If I would walk up to them and say, poor little you are a victim to your experience, I would reinforce the ego and reprogram the trauma into the nervous system, and it would not be processed. But if I walk up to my student and say, sometimes even in a strict way, sit straight, drop your shoulders, relax your jaw, breathe deeply. Now, in that posture, there can be no fight or flight response. Now the energy can move. So what we would do to access trauma is we would get into a meditative state, and then we would scan the body for tight spots or unpleasant feelings, because your body is carrying the memory, but also your energy field, and both intersect. Now, when you find those tight spots in the body, the trick is to sit in a posture that is the opposite of a fight or flight response. So I give you an example. What's a fight or flight response? Well, if I want to fight, this is, yeah, I harden my shoulders, I harden my jaw, I don't want to get knocked out, yeah. Well, if I want to flee or protect myself, I'm doing this. It's a very similar reaction. Every time a reaction like that happens, there is a hardening and it blocks the energy flow. So in order to process a trauma, I need to do the opposite of a fight or flight response. And that is sitting straight and breathing deeply, not rapidly, because now the energy can flow. So if I sit with that emotion, and if I sit with the flashback doing that, the traumatic energy will leave the system. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And then you stop having a trigger.
Wow. I really want to have that, because I get very anxious for very little stuff that I should not be doing that. But again, I said, oh, because I was kidnapped, that's why I'm like this. Again, like you said before, like the name, me, because of what happens to me. But I really want to move that away from me, because it hurts me sometimes.
Well, often the non-acceptance that we feel, of course, keeps the memory there. Because if we haven't brought that memory to wisdom, we still deep down have a desire of understanding why it occurred. So I give you an example, and it's going to be a tough one. I had a client, for example, where his brother was having a child, and at some point he meets that child. It's like a 3-year-old boy, and he's having that child on his lap, and suddenly he is having sexual images towards the child. He's deeply shocked about that experience. He was like, why is that happening? I don't want to feel that. I don't want to see this. So during the process of therapy, we found out that he had memory where he actually was abused by one of his parents, that his mother touched him sexually when he was a baby. In deep meditation, he could relive that experience. The moment he could relive it and understand, and this is the way we deal with karma, the moment you understand that the perpetrator has the same energy as the victim. This is not an easy one for egos. It's not an easy one for those who are trapped in identity. I try to make this clear. The Jews were victims of the Holocaust. But once they had their own country, they were putting Palestinians into ghettos. Because they couldn't forgive the Germans, they still were carrying the energy of the perpetrator within themselves. And when you don't forgive that, when you don't accept that, when you don't come to an understanding that the one who was the perpetrator also must have been a victim at some point, because it's the same energy, you cannot break the wheel of karma, because what you judge, you will become in order to understand it. So often those beings who have caused us tremendous pain were in tremendous pain. Think about someone who is in a perfect state of self-love. There is no urge to hurt another being. So if someone is hurting another being, it means they're not in a state of self-love. That means they're traumatized as well. So what we see right now in society is, for example, ideology of a separating nature coming into fruition, let's say, where it is about identity. But identity is what stops us from forgiving. Now, I can give you an example about experiences that I had, but they will be very difficult to understand for those who didn't have such experience, but I'll give it a try. So what many yogis do, when they reach a certain energy state and go through a certain process, they can relive traumatic memory, not only from current lives, but also from past lives. So at a certain point, I was going through certain memories by doing body scans, and I found, let's say, memories in my energy field in past lives where, for example, I killed on the battlefield, or where I was part of an oppressive regime, for example. So at one point, I asked one of my teachers, and I will make this very clear: don't believe a single thing I say. Verify it for yourself. Make it an actuality in your life. Never live through, let's say, through information that comes from a middle person. Become the source of such knowledge, all right? So let's say at some point I developed the ability to have telepathic conversation with beings who do not have a physical form. And when I saw certain, let's say, sufferings that I had caused in past lives, I was asking one of my teachers, why did I see that? One of my teachers said there is no karma involved with it any longer. So I asked, why did you show me this then? And he said, to show you the power of forgiveness. You were forgiven. Can you forgive your brothers and sisters? So it might be shocking to us that some of the saints in human history at some points were the Hitlers and the Stalins. Now, when we begin to understand that, and humanity is not there yet to accept that, it's a process. But if we could, for example, revisit our past lives, we wouldn't be so judgmental, because we would see people who are in a lower state of consciousness because they carry a lot of trauma and they create more suffering, not because they want to, but because they haven't learned to transcend it yet. So if I have a student sitting on a cushion in the Zen school and he's saying peace is the answer, why are all those people not getting it? Love is the answer. Why are all those people not getting it? And then I will say to that student, why do you think you came to that conclusion? Because in the past you weren't peaceful and you weren't loving.
Wow. So how do you went to the past lives? How you did that?
Well, let's say the process began for me roughly 4 years ago. So I had a loss in my life and I tried to reflect on it. I tried to come to terms with it, but I struggled to do so. And I started doing something that at the time I didn't really understand. I went to a graveyard that is next to my place. It's very beautiful. There are a lot of trees and animals. It's very quiet there. And I started walking on the graveyard for over half a year, continuous walks, and start sitting on benches because I tried to come to terms with that loss. Now, at the time, I already had a psychotherapy license. I had opened my practice and I was already working. I was like, well, I'm a psychotherapist. Well, that's my ego talking. I might as well figure it out. Right? That's the limited identity I had created for myself. And at some point, the pain reached a level of ridiculousness where I had the very simple thought, I'm so tired of fighting this pain. In that moment, something in me surrendered. And what I didn't understand at the time, what then happened, is something that the Buddhists call the state of samadhi. It's a specific state of consciousness. It is the no mind. Suddenly, my whole psyche disappeared. All thoughts disappeared. All emotion disappeared. All memory disappeared. There was just awareness left. No identity. And there was no suffering. So that got my attention. And for several days, I was walking around without having a single thought. For many people, this is literally unthinkable, right? So, and I came to realize walking on the graveyard, I was practicing to die. But it wasn't the death of the physical body, it was the death of identity. Because identity became a limitation. I couldn't bear it any longer to be limited. So then, I keep sitting on those benches, and suddenly, every time I sit and drift into a deep state of meditation, I suddenly start writing about Zen and Buddhism in great detail. And it didn't make any sense because Julian, the person, had never in any way any formal education on the matter. I've never received training. I've never been to a temple in this lifetime in any way. but I was writing a profound book about Zen Buddhism as if I was just downloading it from memory that is not located in the brain. And then it hit me. This was my own memory. I had to quiet my mind in such a way to stop the noise so I would become aware of the more subtle energies that I then started downloading into the nervous system. So then I started having flashbacks. I give you an example. I was in the city and I saw in a shop a beautiful Buddha statue. And I didn't know why, but I just had this intuitive sense, I gotta have this statue. And it was quite big and it looked kind of funny, me walking through the city. People were laughing. Well, fun social experiment. And it wasn't really heavy, but at some point it got really heavy. And I was like, that doesn't make any sense. The statue isn't heavy. Why does it feel heavy? And I had this irrational fear of it might break. I'm thinking, well, if it breaks, it's an object. That's fine. It's not like it's the real Buddha. It's just an object. So then I wait at a tram stop. I'm waiting for the tram, and suddenly I have a flashback. I'm standing somewhere in Japan, and it's evening. I see a forest, and there's a temple burning. And a lot of monks are sitting outside, and they're grieving over the fact that the temple was burning. The moment I carried the Buddha, I had that flashback. My fear of the Buddha breaking was my fear of the temple being destroyed. So the energies that we carry, and that's very, very powerful, the energies that we carry and that we continue to carry even since birth are much older than we think. It is just that we're so occupied with our current programmed identity that we're not open to receiving. Now, most of you have deep, deep wisdom inside. It is just when we focus on improving in our current life, this is the programming that we have received. And the programming that we have received is we're not enough. We got to be better. We got to improve ourselves all the time. Well, I can improve myself this life, right? I can focus on improving and drilling myself and so on. Or I can quiet my mind and download information that could be hundreds of different people that I've lived through. What should be my priority? I find this a very powerful question. Should be my priority to enhance this ego? Or should be my priority to download what I already know?
Amazing. I have a question.
Sure.
Before we run out of time. So this revisiting these memories that you are reliving from your past lives, right? Very interested in this. Is this sort of like quantum jumping? Because I know that when you do a quantum jump, you can download information from past lives.
Can you define
a similar thing?
Yeah, can you define quantum jump for me?
Well, I'll try. But it is like, so the thought process behind this is that the past, present, and future are really happening simultaneously. And you can shift into a different timeline through meditation. And when you go into that alternate timeline, which could be a past life or something like that, you can learn things. You can actually bring back downloaded information with you from this experience. So you can see it as like your vision of the temple burning. You can have this experience where you relive moments or relive a period of time in this sort of past lifetime or alternate timeline. Hope I did that justice. If anyone out there knows quantum jumping, put it in the comments and we'll clear that up. But hopefully I explained that well.
All right. Well, you did wonderfully explaining that. You see, it comes to understanding frequency. Different states of consciousness are separated by frequency. If you think about music, for example, music is separated in octaves. And if you think of one octave as a dimension, you get it. So if I want to jump from one octave to another, I have to change the frequency, don't I? See, the same thing happens with consciousness. So we have 7 portals in the body, of course, 7 chakras, yeah? Now, every portal you could say, is representing a certain frequency of experience, so a certain dimension of consciousness. Now, when we start opening those portals up, our experience becomes multidimensional, because now information from other dimensions is basically seeping through into our reality. So in that sense, yes, all lives exist simultaneously, because life is an illusion within the timeless, within the present moment. So if you access the present moment, this is the back door. This is the glitch in the matrix that is being put in place there, so you can begin tuning into other frequencies than your current reality, your current level or idea of physics. And that's the thing about mysticism. There's a lot of superstition about it. It is deeply misunderstood. Mysticism is nothing but the physics that we haven't, let's say, discovered yet in mainstream science. So what a mystic does intuitively, he's tuning into frequencies of other levels of his or her existence. So there is a definite process to get there. But the reason why I am often not teaching that yet, because there is a danger involved with this. And this is what modern psychiatrists, because they do not understand it, call schizophrenia or psychosis. Now, I want to make this very clear. If you think about a monk or a yogi who has been practicing for 10 years, now what do? I told you that it is about keeping the nervous system calm, so to not have a fight or flight response. Why is that necessary? Because this determines the voltage or the energy of information you can process. If you have a tendency to react, the moment you would enter a multidimensional experience, you would fall into psychosis. You couldn't keep your nervous system steady. You would have some sort of emotional reaction, and this emotional reaction would disturb your energy. And you would fall into a panic, for example, or into the fear of death. And then, because modern psychiatry does not understand it, just basically puts the brakes on it by giving you a medication that blocks the specific chakra. That would make those experiences accessible to you. But it's not healing, it's just blocking. So there's a definite process to go there. That this is the Kundalini yoga process, where we basically recalibrate our nervous system to be able to read this quantum information. But it is a difficult process. In order to get there, let's say we need to do shadow work. What is shadow work? That is trauma work. So what happens when we increase in energy, that everything in your body, in your energy field, that is of low frequency energy needs to leave your system. That means people start detoxing in a very intense way. When someone goes through the Kundalini process, they start throwing up, they get sick for weeks and so on. Because their system is expelling everything that keeps the energy frequency low. And when the Kundalini is activated, it cannot be stopped. It's like a tsunami that starts rising, an energy wave that starts rising in you. Now, if you have still any fear left, and if you didn't have an ego death experience, this is what I described when I spoke to you about sitting on the graveyard and being in no mind state. That means no person present, no psyche, no emotions, no thought. When you haven't experienced that yet, you do not know yet that you are awareness. Awareness cannot die. Awareness is always there. The whole universe is only there because we are aware. So if I haven't had that experience yet, it's most likely that when I start having multidimensional experience, I respond with fear, and the fear will damage my nervous system, because now I will start fighting my own energies who are coming in. And this leads to psychotic breakdown. There is a reason why those things were kept hidden for a very long time, and only initiates would practice them. But this is the way to get there. But in order to get there, you cannot help but go through a tremendous transformation. Now, if you think about it in terms of a metaphor, for example, a caterpillar enters the cocoon to become the butterfly. But when the caterpillar goes into the cocoon, it's being disintegrated by full consciousness. If it would fight the process, it wouldn't come out the other side as a butterfly. And that is the issue with the current collective state of human consciousness, is with the lack of spiritual experience. Once those come in, And our indoctrination has been such a contrast to those other realities that we would experience a great psychological conflict if we're not prepared. Does that make sense?
Completely.
Yeah, 100%. Beautiful.
Right?
Wow. We have 8 minutes to go. I love this conversation with you, Julian. It's like I think we need like a more and more episodes to keep, talking about this.
Sure, I'm open to that.
That's great. Kia, do you have any other question?
I have so many questions. We don't have time.
What's the most exciting one you have? What's the most exciting question?
Okay, so I guess it's more along the lines of a Kundalini awakening, right?
Yes.
So I'd like to know exactly, I guess, what one might experience when they have this. Oh, love you, Marcos. Because I've had an experience, and which I won't go into now because it's kind of detailed, but I would like to know what your thoughts are on the process of a Kundalini awakening. Yeah.
All right. You see, many spiritual masters speak about self-realization. Self-realization is a much more helpful term than enlightenment, because realization means you're realizing something that already exists. You're not creating it. You're not becoming that in that sense. You realize what you already are. Now, to realize who you are, the limitations need to break down. And this is what the Kundalini does. So the Kundalini, in that sense, is an energy potential that sits at the bottom of the spine, let's say roughly a few centimeters above the tailbone. There are various ways of activating it. I'm not getting into that right now because I don't want people to experiment with that when they're not prepared. So when that energy starts rising, what it will do, it will basically do what I just said about the metaphor, let's say about the caterpillar getting into the cocoon to become the butterfly. It will disintegrate the current structure. So while you're being conscious, you're literally being disintegrated. Your whole nervous system starts changing. You will experience mood swings, nervous breakdowns, and many, many other phenomena. And all the trauma that you ever experienced, current life memory, past life memory, will spill into your conscious mind. And during that process, what we need to do is just to allow. Now, when the Kundalini starts rising and it starts at the tailbone and moves up, it will start unblocking all the chakras. That means it will hit every chakra level with very strong energy. And in order to gain energy, whatever blocks that chakra, you need to become conscious of so you can let go of it. So suddenly all your traumas come up. You see violent events you didn't know you experienced previously, for example. And they start entering your mind. Now, we can only go through that process with non-resistance. If we have any sort of resistance or any attempt at control, means we start fighting the Kundalini. And this is like trying to build a dam when the tsunami is coming. It's not going to work. It's going to lead to utter confusion, chaos, and very irrational behavior. Please don't do this if you're experiencing that. So the Kundalini then starts recalibrating your whole nervous system for psychic experience. Because your body and your spine, in that sense, is an antenna. It's a radio receiver. Your brain is not the origin of consciousness. What the brain does, it's basically in the middle. The brain translates the physical experience to the soul, and the brain, in that sense, receives information from soul consciousness. Now, in order for your avatar, let's say your physical representation, your interface in the 3D reality to be a match to your soul consciousness, it needs to be moved up in energy frequency, because otherwise you cannot perceive such psychic experiences. If you have a radio, for example, you change the channel on the radio, and you can pick a channel, and the different is frequencies. If you want to tune into Wi-Fi, you need a Wi-Fi password. if you tell a person from the Middle Ages, here is an invisible field, there's information in it, and you can have a password with this machine and hack into it, he will think you're crazy, right? But yogis do this all the time. Yogis open up their chakras, first of all through the Kundalini practice, but there are many practices after that. But they open their chakras and now they add a frequency band. So your bandwidth is basically increased. And this is when those psychic experiences come in. When you start remembering past life, when you, for example, realize abilities that you have, you didn't even know that you had. There are some very funny moments even. I'll give you an example. This might bring a smile to some people. One time I was sitting in meditation and then I went for a walk and my pants were sliding down a little bit. So I pulled them up with my right hand. But then I realized it wasn't a masculine gesture. It was like a woman lifting up the skirt, right? Because who we are has no gender. We have memories of being female, of being male, of being white, of being black, and so on. You have memories of being Jewish, of being Muslim, of being Buddhist. And this multidimensional understanding will re-enter once your frequency band is widened enough that you can receive such information and decode it into a way of understanding. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Absolutely.
Wow.
Awesome.
So Julian, you have a book. Can you tell everybody what is the name of your book?
Yes. Well, it's called Beyond Psychotherapy, The Laughing God Behind the Masks. And it kind of, I would say, in the book, you will sense an evolution. So it kind of describes how I went from practicing behavioral therapy to realizing mystical knowledge. So basically, it starts very simple and it gets more and more complex. And in the book, I also share quite a lot of my past life memories of, let's say, out-of-body experiences and other psychic phenomena. And what is very dear to me is to break it down in modern language, with modern scientific terms, right? Because the issue that we're facing right now, many people want to know, how do I get access to such experiences? And they start reading the old scriptures, the old Buddhist scriptures, the old Hindu scriptures. So let's say that some of my works still exist that I did write when I was Japanese, and I can read them as an English translation. But I don't even understand them. Like half of that I don't understand, because it's in such a cultural context that you would have to study the language, the culture for a very long time to get access to it. So what we need to do in order to develop a modern mysticism that is accessible, to use modern language, modern terminology, modern scientific terminology, to bring in Western science and to fuse it with the mysticism. This will be much more easily accessible to many people, to have something in modern English that describes similar phenomena, but in a way that they can more easily relate to it.
Right. Okay, so where people can find you to help, for you to help them to move with the traumas or any problem they have.
Right. So what I do also, I give online sessions. So if someone wants to contact me to have a session via Zoom or Skype, for example, they can do so. So I have a website. It's Julian-Polzin.de, right? And there you can find all the information. And if you want to find my book, it is available on Amazon. And you can contact me via my website. The best way is per email. Yeah, I always receive emails. Sometimes I might not pick on the phone because I might be busy and I don't want to disturb. But in that sense, you always reach me per email. So if you have, for example, psychic experiences or certain talents and abilities arising and you're confused, maybe scared, and you don't know how to handle that, feel free to contact me. I really enjoy helping people to come into their own energy and to learn to integrate such experiences.
Wow.
Beautiful.
Beautiful. All right, Julian, thank you so much to be here in our show today. It was a lot of information. That's what I said to Kia. Let's bring him in because I knew that you have a lot of knowledge and we want to squeeze you every single moment of the time.
Yeah.
And before we go, Julian, how many times you was a woman or a man in your past lives?
Well, I don't remember that in particular detail, right? And there is a reason for that. Like, while you still have a physical body, there's only so much information you can process.
Right.
So even when you start having mystical experience and you get in contact with certain intelligences, they will be compassionate enough and kind enough to understand what serves you in your current experience and what doesn't, because the amount of information that is out there is so gigantic. It's impossible to download it into this type of nervous system without exploding, right? So certain informations you might be able to access because it serves your current incarnation, but other than that, it becomes very, very quickly a distraction. So these type of details we often don't know.
All right, Julian. Anything, Kia, before we say goodbye to Julian?
I just want to say thank you for coming. It's been such a wonderful experience to chat with you, and I definitely hope you'll come back and visit us again.
Well, I'm very grateful for you two being so open to listening, and I can see you both are really on your own deeper journey, right? And this is why this openness is there. There's a great curiosity. It's wonderful. Thank you very much for your time.
Okay, Julian, I'm gonna put you in the green room, and we're gonna wrap the show up, and you wait for us, and then we can chat a little bit after we finish.
Sure.
All right?
All right.
Okay, Julian, thank you.
You're welcome.
Wow.
Now I'm curious.
Well, I mean, I've got to say that this episode is so powerful and so good for so many people who are part of what they would consider the woke collective, and that I think anyone that says to me, I consider myself spiritual, should watch this episode and
Yes.
contact him and listen to him, because it's great insight and wonderful things. I gotta say, he cleared up like several things for me.
Me too.
Good.
I just want to have a session with him and see what
think that
to
might have
clear
to
up a
happen.
lot of stuff.
I think that might have to happen. So, because you know, I get those past life downloads. So
Yes, I know that.
it's great to feel less a little bit crazy.
Right. Now you're normal.
Now I know.
You're a collecting normal.
I'm integrating. Don't mess with me. So anyways, that was amazing. Should we wrap it up?
Yes, but before we go, we have our friend Tendai.
Tendai. I know Wednesdays are bad for you, but for our European guests, this time slot works so good. And you know, Hot Topics is a global show, and we have friends all around the world, and we have to make sure that we can get them in all the time. But you know that we throw down on Thursday nights for you. So we expect to see you tomorrow with, is our guest Marcos Corral?
Yeah, Marcos, and he likes Marcos.
So I will tell you what, Marcos actually is a fan favorite. So if you have not seen an episode with Marcos, tune in tomorrow, because it will be our very first Let's Ask Marcos episode.
Right.
And we have lots of questions, because Marcos is really, really smart, if you haven't noticed already, and very, very knowledgeable about male issues. And since we have a lot of male viewers, we're going to tackle some, and as women get a better understanding, you know. So yeah, I love that.
All right, so let's wrap it up.
Well, thank you so much for watching Hot Topics. That's what you've been watching. I hope you've enjoyed it. Thank you for spending an hour with us. And I hope that you'll come back next week, Wednesday or Thursday nights. And every now and again, we have a special Saturday episode with our squad. So thank you for your time. I'm Kia, host of the Female Veterans Podcast and Women Warrior Stories. And I am joined by my always lovely co-host,
Gloria Goldberg, the founder of the podcast Unbreakable Life with Glory, where I talk about depression, anxiety, and PTSD in a natural way, in a holistic way, for you to feel better and to make you feel that you are completely normal.
That's right. So don't forget to set your notifications. And if you're watching us on YouTube, subscribe. as well. And we will see you next time.
All right, guys. See you. Thank you for your support. Bye-bye.